Okay, the story of graphing sine and cosines goes back to the x and y axis in radians. We graphing in standard position start at 0 radians, and then pi over 2 radians, and then pi radians, and 3 pi over 2 radians, and then completing the circle at 2 pi radians. Well, then the next thing we learned was that if we had an angle, that ended at one of these places on the x or the y axis, we would find the sine and the cosine values by placing a point one space away from 0. So we were at the point 1, 0, or 0, 1, or negative 1, 0, or 0, negative 1. And then we learned to use sine, to use y over r, and for cosine, to use x over r. Well, if we place these points one space away from 0, then the radius of that circle was always 1. So then sine always equaled y, and cosine always equals x. So, if we have those points, (1, 0, 0, 1, negative 1, 0, and 0, negative 1, and sine is the y, we would create the following picture if we draw it in a straight line. At 0, the y is 0. At pi over 2, the y is 1. At pi, the y is 0. At 3 pi over 2, the y is negative 1. And at 2 pi, completing the circle, it's back to 0. Therefore, the shape of the sine graph is this every single time. The amplitude of it, meaning the height from the middle to the top or from the middle to the bottom, the amplitude is 1. And the period of it, meaning the length of the picture, is from 0 to 2 pi, so it's 2 pi. The pattern takes 2 pi radians to be drawn. Okay, and cosine. If cosine is the x's, and our points were 1, 0, 0, 1, negative 1, 0, and 0, negative 1, then cosine will look like this. 1, negative 1, set on my scale here. At 0, the first x is 1. At pi over 2, the x is 0. At pi, the x is negative 1. At 3 pi over 2, the x is 0. And completing the circle at 2 pi, the x is positive 1 again. So there's our cycle for cosine. Again, its amplitude, its height from the middle to the top is equal to 1. And its period, meaning how wide it is. It goes from 0 to 2 pi. So the period is 2 pi. Okay, so how does this help us graph? We can graph the sine and the cosine graphs by knowing that basic shape. But we also can put in numbers. We're going to focus on C, A, B. These are the ones that'll be for level 1. D will be level 2, and we'll deal with that at a different point. Okay, first, what do each of these things do? C is the midline of the graph. On the graphs we just drew, the midline was 0. If it's any other number besides 0, it'll be indicated right there. A is the amplitude. It tells us how many spaces to count from the middle to the top of the graph and from the middle to the bottom of the graph. And B finds us our period by taking 2 pi and dividing by B. So B is not the period, but it helps us calculate the period. If it's any number besides 1, the graph will change length. Okay, so let's try some graphs. Say we were going to graph y equals 2 sine x. Okay? The 2 is in front of sine, which makes it the amplitude. Whoops, forgot my A. So, if C is 0, it's not there. That's my midline. Amplitude is 2. That tells me that I can draw my y-axis and put the middle at 0. And the amplitude will tell me that I'm going to have to count 2 spaces to the top and 2 spaces to the bottom of my graph. The top row will be up here, the bottom row will be right here, and the middle will be the x-axis. Okay, there is no b value, so that's a missing 1. So the period will be 2 pi divided by 1, which is still 2 pi. Okay, so I know I'm going to start at 0 and I'm going to stop at 2 pi, but how do I know what to count make my tick marks? Since we need 4 points every time for the 4 quadrants, we're always going to take our period and divide it by 4 to get our scale for the x-axis. Okay, 2 divided by 4 is 1/2, so this is pi over 2. I'm going to count pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2, which is in fact the same as 2 pi. I could have written pi for 2 pi over 2, and I could have written 2 pi for 4 pi over 2. Either way. Okay, lastly, that's a sine graph, and I have to think back to my parent shape. Sine starts in the middle, goes up, back to the middle, back to the bottom, back to the middle. That's the basic sine shape. So sine starts in the middle. My middle was C. So I'm going to start at 0. And then sine at the next tick mark would be at the top, and at the next tick mark would be at the middle, and at the next tick mark would be at the bottom, and at the next one would be at the top. And there we have it. That's our graph. Alright, so what if we had -2 plus 3 cosine 2x? We've got a C, an A, and a B. So our middle will be -2. Our amplitude will be +3. And our period will be 2 pi divided by 2, which is pi. So our scale will be pi divided by 4. So on my graph, I'm going to count 0, pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4. My middle was -2. So the middle of my graph will be down here. My amplitude was 3, so that means I'm going to count 1, 2, 3 spaces up to +1 for the top, and 1, 2, 3 spaces down to -5 for the bottom. And then cosine starts at the top, which I just planned ahead is +1. Then the next tick mark would be in the middle, and the next tick mark would be at the bottom, and then back to the middle, and then back to the top. Notice no points went on my x-axis at all in this situation. Okay, this video is getting pretty long, so I'm going to stop here, and in the next video I'll show you a few examples where there's a negative sine or a negative cosine and show you how that flips the graph over.